All right, folks, we're back, and we'll finish the last portion of the outline that deals with end times and uh, especially relating to Matthew 24 and 25, or really rather Matthew 24 and 25 being sort of a springboard for going into more depth into doctrine dealing with end times. In the last video segment, we were talking about differences of opinions about what's expected to happen. And I was talking about the millennium as being one area that people have different thoughts on, when it's going to come, when Christ comes in relation to that, how believers will be affected by that, what events will come to pass during that time. Now, another area that there's a difference of opinion has to do with the signs that Jesus tells us about specifically. In many places in the Bible, there are signs mentioned about the end times, and Matthew 24 and 25 include a lot of those. So an area of controversy, I guess, around this is, could Christ really come back at any time? Or can we say that that the signs that are talked about in the Bible have to happen first before Christ can return? Now, there's many passages that affirm that his coming can happen anytime, and we see several of those in Matthew 24 and 25, and I've listed those verses on your outline. But there's also a lot of passages in Scripture, in Matthew and in other places, that talk about the signs that will precede his return. So in Matthew 24:14, for example, we are told that the gospel will be preached to all nations. In 24:15 through 22, that there will be a great tribulation. And just to clarify, I wanted to read just a tiny segment about that tribulation time. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another. And many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. Skipping a little bit, you'll see the abomination of desolation. And I'm skipping some more. And if those days, from then, this is verse 21, from then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be. And if those days had not been cut short, no human being would be saved. And then it goes on. So those are just some of the words here in Matthew 24 about the degree of suffering that will be experienced in the tribulation. Other sign we just read there, false prophets performing signs and wonders, trying to lead even the elect astray if possible. We go on to read in Matthew 24, signs in the heavens, the sun and moon darkening, the stars falling from the heavens. In 2 Thessalonians, we read about the coming of the man of sin and rebellion, or the abomination of desolation, as it's referred to in Matthew 24. This is sometimes associated with the beast. In 2 Thessalonians, it's the Antichrist. In Romans, we see that there will be a future large gathering in of the Jewish people, the salvation of Israel. And so these are some of the signs that are listed throughout the Bible that point to Christ's return and perhaps the imminency of his return. So regarding that initial question that I put out, can Christ really come back at any time, or did the signs have to occur first? There's different ways to resolve that question, or different ways that people attempt to resolve the question. One way is just simply that he can't come. He cannot come until the predicted events have come to pass. That's what Scripture says. That's what we believe. That's that. A second way is that he can, in actuality, come at any time. So we need to be ready. That the prediction of the signs that we read throughout the Bible are intended to intensify our expectation of Christ's return and to keep believers from being led astray by false messiahs. This idea I guess, maintains that the signs were never intended to give us a reason not to be ready. So this puts forth this emphasizes the intent of the signs. And then finally, there's the idea that he can come at any time, with three possibilities, with three ideas underneath that idea, I guess. One idea is the possibility that he can come at any time because of the idea of two distinct returns. I mentioned before a secret coming, in which believers are raised up, and then a more public, triumphant coming along with his saints back to earth. So that the secret coming would be the I guess the surprise, the unexpected, the instantaneous, the without warning, and the public triumphant coming would be perhaps after more of the signs had taken place. The second idea is that the signs have already taken place at various times and places, and we'll talk a little bit more, and in various ways, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then the last idea is that it's unlikely but possible that these signs have already taken place. And so I want to go into more of what the unlikely but possible scenario is and how that plays out. It's a response to the tension between the necessary fulfillment of signs as a precursor to Christ's return, but also the unexpected nature of Christ's returning. So in this unlikely but possible response, it's considered that unlikely that the signs have already taken place, or unlikely that they've all already taken place. But it's nonetheless possible, as their occurrence cannot be conclusively ruled out. Let's see, did I have a reading related to... I do, but not yet. So yeah, that's the idea. It's unlikely that the signs have already taken place, but we can't rule out the possibility that they have. So the advantage of this approach is that it preserves the primary purpose of the signs being warnings anticipating Christ's arrival, and the signs intensifying our expectation of his arrival. So in this idea, that tension between those two ideas is maintained. We can still look forward to Christ's return at an unexpected time, because we can't know with certainty that the events haven't already happened. And then if that seems a little odd or difficult to believe, think about the possibility, the question that I wrote here in your outline. Is it possible to be ready for something that we think is unlikely to happen in the near future? It kind of seems contrary to what makes sense. If you think that it's unlikely to happen, it seems unnecessary for us to be ready for it to happen. But the answer to the question I posed here, is it possible that we can think in that way, is yes. We see it in, Wayne Grudem gives the example of wearing a seatbelt. We don't think that a severe car crash is imminent, right around the corner, going to happen the next time we get in the car, and yet every time, hopefully, we faithfully click in knowing that it's possible. So that's sort of how the unlikely but possible happens. So I do want to just, hopefully, again, very briefly, talk a little bit more about these signs and how we might interpret them through the unlikely but possible lens, I guess you might say. So if we're talking about the idea that Christ can't come, or Christ won't come until the gospel has been preached to all the nations, here's what it looks like in the unlikely but possible scenario. It's unlikely that this has already happened, because we know that there's many people groups and tribes in the world who still have not heard the gospel, though we're closing in on it, and that's a good thing. But it is possible. Some people hold that Paul speaks of a gospel being spread to the whole world in Colossians 1:5-6. And And also in Colossians 1:23, he talks about the gospel having been preached to every creature under heaven. So some surmise that maybe this is the possible, this constitutes the possibility that the gospel has already been preached. In other words, that sign has already taken place. With regard to the Great Tribulation, it's unlikely that that has already taken place. Scripture seems to indicate a far greater suffering than has ever been experienced before. But it is possible. There have been many periods of violent, intense persecution of Christians throughout history, throughout places on the earth, the Soviet Union, China, Muslim countries. And some people point to the persecution of the early church as being so horrendous as to constitute the tribulation. Is it possible? Yes. Is it likely? No, but we can't rule it out. So the tension exists. What about the false Christs and prophets? Well, it's unlikely that that has already happened, because when we take Jesus's words, as we read them in Scripture, it seems to predict a far greater manifestation of this activity, and that will be far greater just prior to Jesus's return. But is it possible that this has already happened or is in the process of happening? Witchcraft and demonic activity have produced signs and wonders for centuries. Even if you think about the magicians in Pharaoh's courts, they set about to do the same sort of miraculous kinds of things that God did through Moses. We see that in Exodus 7 and 8. So it's possible. We can't rule out entirely the possibility that there have been many false prophets over the centuries, and that they have gone about doing signs and wonders. But it is also just a straightforward reading of Scripture would lead us to believe that it's unlikely. What about the powerful signs in the heavens? In Matthew 24 and 29 seem to indicate that there will be a literal falling of stars or some sort of heavenly bodies, and a blackening of the moon and the sun, suitable to the cosmic destruction that will come after Christ's return, or at the time of Christ's return. This probably isn't just symbolic language, and yet other people say, well, it's possible that this not necessarily has already occurred, although some people think symbolically of the destruction of the temple as being something like this. But it is possible that these will happen very quickly right before Christ's return, and so therefore we can't. While we can't say that these signs have already taken place, we can say that they would come very quickly with Jesus's return right on the heels of them. So we can still hold this in the realm of possibility in our discussion here. What about the appearance of the man of lawlessness, or the Antichrist? It's unlikely that we've already seen him, and yet with every historical evil person that rises to the surface, we tend to scratch our heads and wonder. Some people point to Nero. Others, I am sure you've heard, Hitler, Stalin. A number of popes over the centuries have been thought of as being the Antichrist and represented as that. But and it's also possible that while any one of these might not have been the Antichrist, that together they could have been what is spoken of in 1 John 2:18, about that many Antichrists have already come. And so perhaps it's been fulfilled that way, or perhaps that these have been precursors to the final Antichrist. It's just there's enough evil people in the world to keep this as a possibility that it has already come to pass, or is maybe in the process of coming to pass. As far as the salvation of Israel, it's unlikely that we've already seen that. Romans 9 through 11 seem to indicate a future massive ingathering of the Jewish people. But some argue that this happened in the first century, and that there is no further massive ingathering, although of course Jews still come to Christ. So it's unlikely that this has happened, but we can't rule it out. So that's all to say that, just to kind of give you a little bit of a background and a little bit of insight and maybe clarity into sort of what we're looking at when we're talking at end times, and to hopefully give us something to think about, and I don't know, just give us a little something to stand on as we try to interpret what's going on in the world around us, as people look to, hopefully, Christians for answers in some of this. And hopefully it gives you some assurance to know that God does have the end times. They are part of his plan. They are part of his time frame. That whatever happens is not outside of his knowledge, that he sees it all, that his perfect plan is unfolding. And I hope that as believers we cling to that. And then and actually just yesterday the thought kind of occurred to me that it's easy to believe sometimes in the scary things, because they scare us, and I guess we're trying to come to terms with them. But if we can believe in the sort of scary, unpleasant things that we read about in Scripture, how much more can we believe in the truth and the goodness that's presented there? And I know that's what we need to cling to go into the days ahead with sober understanding, but also to not leave behind hope, to go in knowing that he's sovereign over it all, and all the good that he encourages with, the truth that we're preserved, that our souls are safe, that nothing can ever separate from his love. We can cling to that, and I hope that we will. Blessings to you all. Hopefully it won't be long until we see each other again. And that concludes this very long discussion on Matthew chapters 24 and 25.